If you were fixing your bra straps, fussing with wires, or battling your bra during this podcast, stop right now. You'll want to hear this. Those bra problems, those problems you thought you had to live with, Third Love has solved them. Their bras make it easy to get what you want, whether it's ultimate cleavage, a smooth look, or stopping your shirt buttons from pulling. With over 60 sizes, including half cups you won't find anywhere else, you'll never be stuck between two sizes that don't fit. So stop settling for bad bras. Now's the time to treat yourself and get your problem solved. Save $15 on your first order with code podcast15 at thirdlove.com.
Hello, I'm Rabia Chaudhry. I invite you to join me every Tuesday for new episodes of Nighty Night Bedtime Stories to Keep You Awake, now on Podcast One. This new incarnation of Nighty Night is an anthology of stories that bring to life classic horror stories, some you're definitely familiar with, and others you'll be hearing for the first time. Join me as I tuck you into bed with stories that will leave you sleepless all night long. Get new episodes of Nighty Night every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 346 of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me, as always, is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibson. Gibby, how are you?
Hey, man, I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm doing pretty well.
Good.
I told the story on TCAP, but I'm a little down on my back. I tried fixing, or did fix a toilet, all the innards, as you called them.
The innards.
And just the labor process caused me some back issues.
So your part-time plumbing job not going so well.
not going so well. That's the only job I'll be doing for quite a while.
Yeah.
If I can help it. Let's go ahead and give our Patreon shout outs. We had Mel from Australia.
Hey, Mel, good day.
Michelle Wild Win.
Hey, Win.
Tiffany.
What's going on, Tiffany?
Laura K 428.
Well, thanks, Laura.
Marie Besenson.
Marie.
Scott O.
What's going on, Scott?
Julie Moore.
Hey, Julie.
Katie O'Donnell jumped out at our highest level.
Man, look at good old Katie.
DH.
Hey, DH.
Anna Elmore.
Hey, well, thank you, Anna.
Sandra Wiggins.
Well, what's up, Sandra?
Elizabeth Duty.
Oh, look at Elizabeth coming through.
And last but not least, Christina Weller.
Well, thank you, Weller.
And then if we go back into the vault, this week we selected Rachel Heather Lee Lang.
Well, thanks, Rachel Heather Lee Lang.
Yeah.
You're awesome.
Appreciate the new support, the continued support. We have an episode out right now on True Crime All the Time where we're talking about Dustin and Ginger Jefferson. Dustin's wife, Carrie O'Claire Jefferson, was stabbed to death. And then Dustin's mother, Carrie's mother-in-law, Ginger, was charged with the crime. Dustin was charged with the crime. It's a very strange case in that, you know, people are blaming other people, and it's one of those where the jury really has to figure out who did what.
It's a very strange family dynamic.
Yeah, very strange. But make sure you check that out. All right, buddy, are you ready to get into this episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved?
I am.
We are on to the second and last part on our coverage of the Axeman of New Orleans. In the first part, we talked about several of the crimes and murders and how the police and media thought it could be Italian mob-style hits based on the Black Hand gang or mafia. We learned that the series of murders were first known as the Cleaver killings. And in some of the murders, the victims died of gunshots or a straight razor. There were a number of suspects, and they varied from a white man, a black man, and then an Italian man. The police made a few arrests, but could never hold or convict the suspects. We also talked about how most of the murders started with a break-in, but nothing was stolen in most cases, or if there was a theft, it was minimal, as the murderer would only take some valuables, yet leave behind others that were in plain sight. So as we start part two, We have to transition back to 1918. In the early hours of August 4th, Mary Schneider, who was 8 months pregnant with her fourth child, woke up to find a man standing over her. She was then beaten in the face repeatedly with a blunt object. Her husband, Ed Schneider, found her after midnight. When he returned home from work, the home was ransacked and over $100 was stolen, along with the couple's axe. However, the police believed Anna was attacked with a lamp that was sitting on a table, not an axe. So absolutely brutal, right? This woman is 8 months pregnant, super scary to wake up, I assume, to find a strange man standing over you.
Yeah.
And then this man starts beating you repeatedly in the face with a blunt object.
And you're trying to just figure out why. Why are you beating me?
And to protect yourself and to try to stay alive and all of that. And then pretty tough on the husband, right? When he comes home and finds his wife. Now, there was over $100 stolen, and that was a lot of money in 1918. And then, let's take a look at the couple's axe being stolen, but apparently not being used in the attack, or any axe being used in the attack. What does that mean?
Maybe it's not the same guy.
Or maybe, if it was the axe man, he didn't have an axe at the time. Committed the crime, used a lamp, but then found an axe and took off with it to use in a subsequent crime. I don't know.
Are you saying he didn't have an axe to grind?
Maybe. That was actually very clever. It was noted that the windows and doors were not forced open. Reporters thought Anna had been attacked by the Axeman, but some historians do not count her among the victims because she was not Italian and she wasn't attacked with an axe or a hatchet. And my thought is probably a lot of reporters looked at many attacks and thought, oh, there goes the Axeman again.
Yeah, I think it was probably easy back then to start associating more and more attacks to that.
Luckily, Anna survived and gave birth to her baby 2 days later. She said she didn't remember any details of the attack. On August 10th, 1918, Pauline and Mary Bruno awoke to a loud noise in their uncle Joseph Romano's room. They entered the room and discovered that he had been hit on the head. They saw the attacker fleeing the scene. They described him as having dark skin, being heavy-set, and wearing a dark suit with a slouched hat. Okay. I don't think I've ever heard the term slouched hat.
And you like hats.
I do like hats.
So I wonder if is that like a kind of like an angle, kind of like over your eyes?
Yeah, maybe. They used to wear them differently back then. An axe was found next to his bed, and his pocketbook was stolen. A panel of the back door was chiseled away. And this is something that you talked about in episode 1. Kind of the construction of doors back then. It seems like it was not all that hard to gain entry into a home.
Yeah, I think you could chisel your way through. I have a house that was built in 1910.
Is that a question?
I was trying to remember.
Because it sounded very much like a question. I don't know when your house was built.
Yeah, 1910. Well, okay. I just bought it recently, right? I'm rehabbing it, but it's got those like panel doors that you could easily take a bottom piece out, and
just come right on in.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully that's going to be part of your remodel, because you've just told everyone on this podcast that you can chisel right into your house.
Yeah, it's definitely very much as part of the rehab.
Okay, that's good. Now, although Joe was not a grocer, his family ran a small grocery at the front of the house. 2 neighbors reported that in the weeks prior, they had chased away attempted intruders who dropped an axe as they ran. After Joe was killed, 3 Italian grocers were robbed in a manner similar to the Axeman's typical methods. But I want to go back to these neighbors that are chasing away intruders who they find out dropped an axe. Okay, the papers are running all these stories about the Axeman murders. That would have to be pretty scary, thinking that you possibly could have been a victim of the Axeman, but she somehow scared him away.
Yeah, because it could have easily turned the other way, right?
But also, maybe continued fear, because is he going to come back and finish you off? Although Joe was able to walk after the attack, he died on August 12th from head trauma. And it was said by this point, residents of New Orleans were living in constant fear of an attack, especially Italians. And I don't know how they couldn't be.
Yeah, I'm thinking if you're an Italian grocer, you're not sleeping too comfortable at nighttime.
No, you might have to be taking shifts, guarding, sitting up all night. The police received numerous reports from people who thought they saw the Axeman lurking in their neighborhood. And I would think that if you saw anyone who you thought was quote unquote lurking, you would call in and say, I think that's the Axeman, because that's the boogeyman that's out there right now. In August 1918, retired detective D'Antonio told the Times-Picayune that the 1918 attacks were likely committed by the cleaver from 1910 to 1911, saying, I'm convinced the man is of a dual personality, and it is very probable he is the man we tried so hard to get 10 years ago, when a series of axe and butcher knife murders was committed within a few months. My opinion is based on experience and a study of criminology. Witnesses described the cleaver as a white man, but Detective Frank Mooney believed the killer was a black man. According to Smithsonian Magazine, Mooney called the killer a fiend, who he described as having a Jekyll and Hyde personality, like Jack the Ripper. He said, suddenly the impulse to kill comes upon him and he must obey it.
Sounds like some serial killers we've talked about.
It does. I don't know how that factors in to this detective believing the killer was a black man.
Yeah, it's pretty random, it seems.
It's almost, and I'm kind of reading between the lines here, but it's almost as if he's saying, this man is a fiend, he must be a black man.
Yeah.
And obviously that would be extremely racist if that was his way of thinking. The attacks stopped for several months after this. On the night of March 10th, 1919, screams were heard coming from the home of Charles Cortimiglia, an Italian immigrant. Charles lived with his wife, Rosie, and his 2-year-old daughter, Mary, in Gretna, Louisiana, a suburb of New Orleans. A grocer named Orlando Giordano ran over to investigate and saw that the family had been attacked. Mary was killed during the attack. She was hit once on the back of the neck. Rosie, who had a serious head wound, was holding her in her arms. Charles was on the floor and also seriously injured. Both he and Rosie were diagnosed with skull fractures. So another very vicious attack in which a 2-year-old was killed. The parents were, very seriously injured.
I mean, so this Axeman has no boundaries.
No, I don't think so. I think that's pretty obvious. We keep hearing the authorities use the word fiend. And one person said, this impulse to kill comes upon him. He must obey it. You said that sounds very much like a lot of the serial killers that we cover on TCAT, and it really does. From some of their own words. We have called it a frog demon at times, but there is something inside them that wells up, and sometimes they can keep it at bay for periods of time, but at a certain point, it must be satisfied.
Yeah.
That's the way people have explained it. But I thought it was interesting that a grocer ran over to investigate. I mean, everyone's a grocer.
Yeah.
In this area, it sounds like.
Seems like there's a lot of grocery going on.
The home was ransacked, but nothing was stolen. 2 axes were found on the property. One of them had blood and hair on it. A panel on the back door had been chiseled away. So, I think when you look at these attacks, there are a lot of similarities. You would have to say that. And I'm sure it's the reason why, so many of them get lumped in as the Axeman. The chiseling away of the door panel, the fact that Axes are used. Axes are found. Italians are being attacked. There are just too many similarities to dismiss.
You know, every time you say the Axeman, I hear the song The Taxman in my head by the Beatles.
I'm actually not familiar with that song.
Maybe that's not the name of the song. The Taxman.
I admittedly am not the biggest Beatles fan in the world, but I know most of their big hits.
Yeah.
I just don't remember one being called The Taxman. You could be absolutely right.
Or I could be really wrong.
You could be very wrong. There's very little in between with you.
That's true. That's true.
Charles was released from the hospital on March 12th, but Rosie was still being treated. Investigators questioned the family repeatedly while they were in the hospital, asking things like, who hit you? Was it the Giordano's? Frank did it, didn't he? According to the doctor who treated Rosie, she said she didn't know who attacked her. After Rosie was released, Sheriff Luis Marrero had her arrested as a material witness and put her in the Gretna jail. She was kept in a cell overnight and released after she signed an affidavit implicating Orlando Giordano and his son Frank in the attack.
It's almost like, hey, you go ahead and say these guys did it.
We'll let you out.
Otherwise, you're staying here.
But how awful is it to be arrested after you were the victim of this horrible attack? You said you didn't remember anything. That just seems awful.
It does seem awful.
It was said that 69-year-old Orlando was in poor health, and Frank was over 6 feet tall and weighed over 200 pounds. He most likely could not have fit through the back door panel of the home.
I think the police just wanted somebody to peg all these murders on.
Yeah, I think they wanted to solve the murders. I think they wanted an arrest. I'm sure they wanted to quell the fear of the public. The police thought that these two men could have a motive. Apparently, the Giordanos were friends with the Cortimiglias for a long time. The elder Giordano was no longer able to run his grocery store due to his age. Frank didn't want to take over his father's business, so they leased the grocery to the Cortimiglias. In December 1918, the Giordanos took the store back, which displeased the Cortimiglias. They opened a store next door to the Giordanos, which soured their relationship.
Well, I'm sure that would, but you also took the store that you gave them back, so maybe they were a little soured with the relationship before they opened up the new store.
Yeah, maybe they opened the store to spite the Giordanos. You could say that they were, displeased. That's probably an understatement. And I'm sure it wasn't just happenstance that they opened one next door. They were probably wanting to compete and maybe even put them out of business. Charles denied his wife's claims, but the two men were still arrested and charged with the murder of his daughter, Mary. So even if there was animosity between the families, Charles wasn't trying to pin the murder of his daughters on the Giordanos.
Yeah, and would someone go that far to kill a 2-year-old over a grocery store dispute?
We've seen people killed for less, but it doesn't seem like a great motive, but it's not a motive, if that makes sense. True Crime All the Time Unsolved is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Most of you listening right now are probably multitasking. Yep, while you're listening to Gibby and I talk, you're probably also driving, cleaning, exercising, or maybe even grocery shopping. But if you're not in some kind of moving vehicle, there's something else you can be doing right now. Getting an auto quote from Progressive Insurance. It's easy, and you could save money by doing it right from your phone. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save nearly $750 on average. And auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Discounts for having multiple vehicles in your policy, being a homeowner, and more. So just like your favorite podcast, Progressive will be with you 24/7, 365 days a year, so you're protected no matter what. Multitask right now. Quote your car insurance at Progressive.com to join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $744 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2022 and May 2023. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations. The Gretna authorities believe that the attack was a result of a vendetta between the Giordano's and the Cortamiglias, and not the Axeman. And I don't know if this is something that we've talked about yet or not, but you do see this crop up in cases of serial killers who have a very distinct MO and, have killed a lot of people. Is it possible, because all of that information is reported in the paper, that someone could pick up on that and commit a murder, kill someone they've been wanting to kill, use that same MO in the hopes that it would be blamed on this serial killer?
Well, yeah, it's almost like a prime opportunity.
Yeah, I think it could be viewed by some as that. The Axeman's most infamous actions were published in the Times-Picayune, a local paper, on March 16th, 1919. 3 days earlier, they received a letter supposedly written by the Axeman. The letter reads as follows: Hell, March 13th, 1919. Esteemed mortal, they have never caught me, and they never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible, even as the ether that surrounds your earth. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell. I am what you Orleanians and your foolish police call the Axeman. Okay, I'm a little scared already.
Yeah, it's a little spooky.
When I see fit, I shall come and claim other victims. I alone know whom they shall be. I shall leave no clue except my bloody axe, besmeared with blood and brains, of he whom I have sent below to keep me company. And this part stood out to me because I did think it was very interesting that the axe was left very often at the crime scene. Most murderers don't want to leave their murder weapon behind.
Well, especially in today's world, right?
Well, yeah, with the technology that we have today. But, even back then, it doesn't seem like the smartest thing to do to leave it behind. But it seems like it was part of the process for this person. Like they did it on purpose for effect or, something.
Kind of like in your face?
Maybe. The letter went on to read, if you wish, you may tell the police to be careful not to rile me. Of course, I am a reasonable spirit. I take no offense at the way they have conducted their investigations in the past. In fact, they have been so utterly stupid as to not only amuse me, but his satanic majesty, Francis Joseph, etc. But tell them to beware. Let them not try to discover what I am, for it were better that they were never born than to incur the wrath of the Axeman. I don't think there is any need of such a warning, for I feel sure the police will always dodge me, as they have in the past. They are wise and know how to keep away from all harm. Undoubtedly, you Orleanians think of me as a most horrible murderer, which I am, but I could be much worse if I wanted to. If I wished, I could pay a visit to your city every night. At will, I could slay thousands of your best citizens, for I am in close relationship with the angel of death. Now, to be exact, at 12:15 earthly time on next Tuesday night, I am going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I'm going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared, in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well then, so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not have jazz on at that specific Tuesday night, if there will be any, will get the axe. Well, as I am cold and crave the warmth of my native Tartarus, and it is about time I leave your earthly home, I will cease my discourse, hoping that thou wilt publish this, that it may go well with thee. I have been, am, and will be the worst spirit that ever existed, either in fact or realm of fantasy. Signed, the Axeman.
Wow.
Wow. I mean, what do you say to a letter like this? I mean, we've read a lot of letters, whether, it was the Zodiac, and, those are always scary, BTK, people like that. This person is really kind of taking it to a different level. I mean, you're talking about not being human, being a demon, being a spirit, passing over the city, leaving this earthly plane, things like that. And then there's this whole thing about, I want every home at 12:15 next Tuesday to have jazz playing. If there is any home that is not playing it, well, they're going to get the axe. Okay, you publish this letter. I don't care if I have to go out and find jazz. I'll have jazz playing just in case.
This whole case, including this letter, because it's part of the case, seems so fitting for New Orleans.
Well, New Orleans, jazz, they go together, right? There is some demon, spirit, Santeria stuff that you think of as far as New Orleans. But my thought, whenever we see this type of communication from the supposed killer is, why? Why the need to correspond? Now, obviously, in all the cases where it happens, the perpetrator, if they are the real perpetrator, they're getting something out of it. Is it instilling more fear in the public than they already have? Is it seeing whether they can make everybody, play jazz at 12:15? How much can I control the populace through my words?
Well, he's definitely very confident.
Well, I think he's confident because he's been able to get away with a lot up to this point.
Yeah.
He even says it, right? The police, they won't get me. They pass right by me. But for a lot of perpetrators, there is something about, needling the police, the public, the press, whoever it is, they enjoy it. And I'm sure this person did as well. According to sources from the time, numerous people in the city spent the night at dance halls or attended house parties that hired jazz bands. Many people chose to ignore the letter and did nothing that night. Now, I don't know which one I would be. I think because I would probably just err on the side of caution, I might just, make sure I had a little jazz going on. Now, on the other hand, there's got to be a thought that runs through your mind. How is this person going to know every home that is not playing jazz at 12:15?
Yeah, be impossible.
Yeah. Now, if this person is mortal, if you were somehow to believe that this really is a demon or a spirit or something like that, well, maybe you don't want to take that chance.
Right.
But no one was killed on March 19th. Meanwhile, Orlando Giordano and his son Frank went to trial just 2 months after the murder of Mary Cortimiglia. The only evidence against them was Rosie's statement. And that's pretty rough given how we know the statement was obtained.
Yeah.
She was arrested after suffering a serious injury and basically said, we'll let you go
if you
implicate, these two individuals. On May 29th, 1919, they were both found guilty. The elder Giordano was sentenced to life in prison and Frank was sentenced to death. But this was not the end of their case. On August 10th, 1919, Steve Boca was attacked in his bedroom after waking up in the middle of the night and seeing a man standing over his bed. Once he regained consciousness, he ran outside and he realized that his head was split open.
Oh man, want to vomit.
Yeah, that kind of gives you the willies. He went to a neighbor's home for help and collapsed. Steve made a full recovery, but he couldn't remember any details of the attack. Similar to the other cases, nothing was stolen from his house and a panel on his back door was removed.
Just seems like he must have been struck so hard And that's what woke him up. And it was probably just like, what the heck is going on? And then realized that you were struck so hard, it splits your skull open.
Yeah, I'm actually amazed that he was able to get up, get to a neighbor's house before collapsing.
Maybe adrenaline.
Maybe. But I'm not surprised that he didn't remember, really any details of the attack, much like the previous attack we just talked about. If you suffer these major blows to the head, how much are you really going to be able to remember? On September 3rd, 1919, 19-year-old Sarah Lawman was attacked inside her home. Her neighbors came to check on her and broke into the house when she didn't answer the door. They found Sarah unconscious in her bed. She had a severe head injury and was missing several teeth. The intruder entered through an open window and attacked her with a blunt object. A bloody axe was found on the front lawn of the building. So this one jumped out at me because of the fact that, neighbors actually broke into the home to check on her. I don't know how many people would do that.
Especially during this time.
Now, why do you think that?
Because the Axeman, the fear of.
Okay, I get that. My thought was actually the opposite. I can't imagine too many people doing that today. Say you lived in an apartment and you heard something next door. Would your first thought be to break down the door to make sure that that person was all right? I don't know that most people's first thought would be to do that.
Probably not. Not today.
But maybe it was because of the Axeman that they thought he had struck and they wanted to make sure she was all right. I really don't know.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was just it was that much easier to get into people's homes and apartments back then.
Seems like it.
But kind of hard not to put this one as an Axeman attack, right? A bloody axe being found on the front lawn, you either have a serious copycat or this is the Axeman. Like Steve Boca, Sarah recovered but couldn't remember the attack. Some historians, like Miriam Davis, do not believe Sarah was attacked by the Axeman.
Can we say, and while these last two attacks occurred, we still have the father and son locked up. So either the police have the wrong murderers,
or that was not part of the Axeman attacks.
Yeah.
But it didn't say why Miriam Davis didn't think this attack was the Axeman. But like I said, what better way to attack someone that you've been wanting to hurt than to do it with an axe, leave a bloody axe somewhere around the crime scene? Well, you would think police are going to connect that with the Axeman, and they would be less likely to maybe look at other suspects that they normally would. The final attack associated with the Axeman of New Orleans occurred that fall. On October 27th, 1919, Esther Pepitone was woken up by screaming. Esther and her husband Mike owned a corner store at the front of their building and had gone to sleep after a busy day. She woke up just before 1 a.m. on October 27th, hearing her husband shout, "Oh my God." Mike soon went unconscious. Their mattress was soaked in blood and the walls were splattered with blood. Mike was hit in the head 18 times with an iron bar. The Times-Picayune reported in 1919, his head was battered into an almost unrecognizable mass.
I bet if you've been hit in your head 18 times with an iron bar.
Yeah, that's a tough one to even think about, really. Esther said she saw two shadowy figures in their bedroom, but she couldn't identify the men. They left the house through the room where their 6 children were sleeping and exited through the back door. The New Orleans States quoted Esther as saying about Mike, "Every time he hurt his head, blood came from his head and face. It simply poured over the bed." I mean, that is so descriptive.
Very gross.
Yeah, nasty. Esther opened a window and began screaming for help. Her 11-year-old daughter also ran out to find someone to come to the house. A sheriff's deputy who lived on their block was on his way home from work and responded to the calls for help. The deputy found the weapon sitting on a chair next to Mike. He described it as a large bolt with a heavy nut attached to it, or a stake used to secure a tent at a circus. There was a circus that weekend, about a block away from the family store. In this case, the killer broke a window at the front of the house. The police found $100 in the kitchen, which indicated to them that robbery was not the motive. Mike was rushed to the hospital and died within 2 hours. He was only 36 years old. So, I said that this was the last attack associated with the Axeman of New Orleans, but there was no axe.
No, just a different type of blunt object.
The police didn't understand how Esther didn't wake up while Mike was being assaulted in bed next to her. She explained, as quoted by the Times-Picayune, "I sleep very heavily. I heard nothing until my husband screamed."
I can see somebody sleeping through something like that. There's some pretty heavy sleepers out there.
Well, I think I've talked about it before. I'm about as heavy of a sleeper, I think, as you can get. It's so bad that I can't use my iPhone alarm because it's not loud enough to wake me up, even with the volume turned all the way up. I have to have one of those special alarm clocks that is like for heavy sleepers. They actually make them.
Yeah.
And it, basically shoots out a flashbang and there's a SWAT team that comes in. But it is so hard for me to wake up.
Yeah. My
My wife, on the other hand, if a piece of lint fell off the bed and hit the ground, she would bolt up.
Be like, what?
What's going on? Yeah. She is such a light sleeper. So it does sometimes worry me that I wouldn't hear an intruder or something like that. But I know my wife would, and the dog would as well.
I had a person that lived above me one time that had a alarm clock tied to their was part of their bed.
Mm-hmm.
So 6:30 every day in the morning, their bed would vibrate. That was their alarm. It would vibrate until they got up and hit whatever button.
Yeah, they make those for people who are hard of hearing, but they can also be used by anyone, obviously. But
yeah.
I know they make it where it becomes part of the bed, or you slide something under the mattress to make it vibrate.
Oh, I know. It was very irritating because it would wake me up as well.
Yeah, I would not like that at all. Now, investigators thought Mike's murder could be connected to the Axeman, but they looked for suspects among his friends and family as well. And I actually think that's pretty smart because, there's danger in just assuming that, these attacks are the Axeman. Just like we said, right? Somebody could use this series of events, these series of attacks as a cover.
Easy to do during these times.
It would be. So I think it would be wrong to discount, any other suspects. Looking at friends, family was a good thing. Back in 1910, Mike Pepitone and his father, Peter, were at the center of a murder case that involved a feud between warring mafia factions, per the Times-Picayune. That does not sound like a good scenario.
No, it does not.
In April 1910, a man named D. Christina was shot 3 times in front of a building owned by Peter Pepitone. This man had once leased this building from Peter for the purpose of running a grocery store. Mike took over the business once the lease expired. D. Christina opened a business next door. Peter confessed that he fired the fatal shot from Mike's bedroom as his son slept. At his later trial, Peter argued that D. Christina had attacked him several times when he tried to collect debts. Peter Pepitone was convicted of manslaughter. Before he was sentenced, his attorney appealed for leniency and claimed that after the verdict, he learned that D. Christina's real name was Paolo Marchesi. Marchesi was convicted of murder in Italy. According to the Daily Picayune, he was the leader of a gang of bomb throwers, blackmailers, and Black Hand.
That individual.
Yeah. Peter Pepitone served 5 years in prison and then was released. He was still alive when his son was killed. After Mike was murdered, he told the police that the dispute with D. Christina was not an old country feud. It was a business rivalry. He said no one would have wanted to hurt Mike because of the D. Christina case. But is that really true? if this guy was really the leader of, kind of a Black Hand outfit, is it not possible that they could have sought revenge and, decided to kill this man's son?
I would think they would.
To me, it doesn't seem out of the realm of possibility. It actually seems very possible.
Same here. I think it's extremely possible. I just, this whole time through last week and this week, I'm thinking, there's no way if I was Italian, I don't think I'd want to have anything to do with the grocery business.
You got to sell that bad boy and move out of Louisiana, I think, don't you?
Yeah. It just sounds like you're just waiting for someone to come along to do some harm to you.
Well, you're definitely in the demographic of being at risk. But in all reality, I mean, how easy is it for most people to completely uproot their lives, sell their business, move out? And I think most people think, well, okay, it's not going to happen to me.
Right. Well, they're part of an Italian community to pick up and go somewhere else where you might not have that community.
Yes, that's a big point. It's not like it is today.
No.
We talked about that in episode 1. You had these clusters of people in different parts of the country who settled there from, other countries. And they did so because they wanted to be with, like-minded people that were like them, came from the same place as them, I guess.
Because we know back then, I mean, Italians were discriminated against.
Yeah, absolutely. But you mentioned the Giordano's still being held. In February 1920, Rosie walked into the Times-Picayune office and retracted her testimony against both Frank and Orlando Giordano. She signed another affidavit declaring that she never saw her attackers and was pressured into identifying the Giordano's. And we talked about it. It very much sounded like she was. It didn't sound like she had much choice if she wanted to leave that jail cell.
Yeah. You're going to sign this, and this is going to be your statement or else.
Prosecutors threatened her with perjury charges if she didn't stick to her original story. But Rosie was adamant about telling the truth. The Giordano's were finally released from prison in December 1920.
So they spent, about a year there?
Yeah, not too long, but I think any amount is longer than you'd like to be if you didn't do it. Now, I do want to talk about Rosie for a minute, just because it took a lot of moxie. And I'll use that word because it's probably a word they would have used back in 1919. But it really did take a lot of courage for her to take this step. She didn't have to do it. My assumption is it was probably weighing on her heavily.
Yeah.
That, this father and son were sitting in jail solely based on something that she had said she was pressured into saying, but that wasn't true.
Make it right.
Yeah, make it right. But in the face of being threatened with perjury charges and all of that, that's not an easy thing to do, but she stuck to her guns. According to the Times-Picayune, Esther Pepitone moved to Los Angeles in January 1921. In September, she married Angelo Albano, who was formerly married to her deceased sister.
Hey, ex-brother-in-law, let's get together.
Let's get married. Before the wedding, Angelo dissolved a business partnership with Doc Mumphrey, also from New Orleans. Mumphrey was living in San Bernardino, California. Doc's name varies across different sources. His first name could have been Joseph, Leon, or Frank. And his last name could have been Mumphrey, Manfrey, Monfrey, Mumphrey, or Humphrey. So when I say it varies, it varies by a lot.
Yeah, when you research stuff from back in the 1920s, you just never know.
No, you never know. But apparently this guy once worked as a pharmacist, but back in 1908, he was convicted of throwing a bomb at an Italian grocery store after trying to extort money from the owner. And, you said it, Gibbs, Italians were discriminated against. So I think if you were an Italian who owned a grocery store, it sounds like you were a prime target for extortion because of some of the discrimination. According to LA Times, Esther later told the police that she knew him as Frank Mumphrey. He and Angelo purchased a house together, and her husband later bought him out. They had other business dealings, but months earlier, her husband bought him out and paid him in full. On October 27th, 1921, Angelo left home to buy some food for dinner, per the LA Times. Witnesses saw him at the supermarket, and he was seen making a withdrawal from the bank, but he was never seen again after this. A week after Angelo went missing, Esther went to Doc Mumphrey and asked if he knew anything. According to her account to the LA Times, he allegedly responded, yes. Albano has a big house and plenty of money. He is being held for some of that money. His wife will be asked for it after things quiet down.
So kidnapped?
Sounds like it. It's also a strange response because it suggests that he wasn't aware Angelo and Esther were married, because she's coming to him and he's saying that his wife will be asked for the money. On December 5th, 1921, Esther and her 3 children were at home when Mumphrey knocked on their door. He demanded $500 and Esther's jewelry and said if she didn't comply, he would kill her the same way he killed her husband. Esther went to her room and retrieved a .38 caliber revolver. She shot at Mumphrey but missed. He struggled to remove his gun from his pocket, so Esther shot at him again and hit him. She shot him multiple times until she emptied her revolver, then grabbed a second .38 caliber gun and shot at him again.
Whoa, she wasn't messing around.
She then went to a store next door and asked the worker to call the police. No, she was not messing around. I mean, first of all, she's got 2 different .38 caliber revolvers and apparently knows how to use them very well. She missed her first shot, but after that, she was on target. But how much can you really blame her? I mean, this man has already said he kidnapped her husband. Then he said, he was going to kill her the same way he killed her husband. Obviously, it was a very threatening situation.
Yeah, she really had no choice.
It does seem to be, self-defense. He's at her home.
Her kids are nearby.
Yeah. The coroner's report listed his name as Leon J. Manfrey and indicated he was shot 8 times. Esther was arrested and charged with murder, but she was acquitted on April 10th, 1922. Esther died in 1940. And the reason why we bring up this Doc Mumphrey or, whatever his name was,
right,
because it's listed a million different ways, was that several crime writers have theorized that he was the Axeman of New Orleans. For example, scholar Richard Warner wrote that Doc Mumphrey could be a suspect because he owned a jazz business that was struggling before the murders, but was doing well after the Axeman wrote his letter.
Oh, the jazz band business picked up.
Yeah, it seems like a little bit of a stretch to me. I would need a lot more information than that to even start to believe that that qualifies him as a suspect or, as a person who could be the Axeman. True crime writer Michael Newton wrote that Mumphrey was a common last name in New Orleans in the early 20th century. There may have been someone named Joseph Mumphrey or Mumphrey who had a criminal record or ties to organized crime, but this can't be confirmed due to a lack of historical records.
And we're not surprised based on the year that this case took place.
No, records are sparse, right? It's much harder to research these types of cases. I do think, one of the more unusual theories in the Axeman case is that the killer did all of this to promote jazz music. This theory is supported by the infamous Axeman letter. I mean, I think that's what a lot of people believe, but historians and criminal profilers think it's unlikely that the Axeman even wrote this letter. So it could be that some enterprising, jazz band guy or owner of a jazz nightclub or something like that wrote the letter,
Possible.
To encourage business. Historian and author Miriam Davis believes that jazz musician Joseph Davila wrote the letter. Davila wrote the song The Axeman's Jazz, Don't Scare Me Papa, in the early hours of March 19th, 1919. On March 20th of that year, the Times-Picayune reported that Davila admitted to finishing the song at 2 a.m. that night after he was sure the Axeman had no designs on him personally.
You know, I was thinking about this whole Axeman thing and the groceries, the Italians, the scare tactics, the attacks, the murders.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we talk about the Black Hand group, and I'm thinking, if you want someone to pay for protection, you want them to come off their money. First, you got to come in and scare the shit out of everybody so that they want to pay you.
Which this would do.
Stores and
which this would do.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. I mean, if we're talking about theories, I think that's a really good one. Could the mafia or whatever you want to call a group of individuals use this as a scare tactic to help ensure that Italian grocery store owners pay them protection? Possibly. I wouldn't put it past them. There has been a lot of mafia talk, Black Hand, kind of all of this type of stuff. The other thing that I think is, if there really was a serial killer called the Axeman, is it possible that, he killed a number of people, but some of these attacks, like we said, were perpetrated by other individuals, and then, they kind of use the Axeman MO as a cover. And I think that's entirely possible as well.
Yeah, I think so.
Over a century later, the Axeman of New Orleans remains unidentified. Writers and historians sometimes disagree on which cases should be grouped together and whether or not the early cases from 1910, 1911 should be included. But most of the Axeman cases followed a pattern. There was forced entry, an attack with an axe, hatchet, or cleaver, and then the perpetrator fleeing the scene quickly, occasionally stealing low-value items, or sometimes not really stealing anything at all. And I think, when we go back and we talk about the victims being almost exclusively Italian grocery store owners, why is that? I mean, to answer that question, I think would go a long way in maybe trying to figure out who the killer was or what type of person the killer was. Was it that the Axeman was a white, non-Italian man, which I think a lot of people believe to be the case. So it's possible that there were ethnic prejudices that played a role in the murders and attack. And I do think that's possible.
Sure it is.
I mentioned in episode 1 how much prejudice there was during this time by one group against another. And there were just a lot of it.
Maybe this was the Axeman's way of letting Italians know he didn't appreciate them being in his city.
Or running grocery stores. And I think the other thing we really have to talk about, which we did kind of mention in episode 1, was, was this a person who was fired from a grocery store, maybe even an Italian grocery store, and really just held a grudge so specifically against Italian grocers?
Maybe.
And again, it's hard to take any possibilities off the table.
It could have been somebody had a farm that thought he could supply the groceries, and maybe they didn't want to take his groceries, or
they turned him away.
Or didn't want to pay him what he wanted, and he decided to take.
He said, "I'll show you, get even." Yeah, I mean, I do think it's probably one of the reasons why this case is still so heavily discussed, even as old as it is. It's interesting for people to kind of look at the what ifs and try to figure out what type of person this could be. Probably going to be pretty hard to narrow it down to exactly who it was. but even trying to get to the point of, what type of person, what's the real motive? Was it prejudice of all Italians? Was it revenge against Italian grocers specifically? I don't know. The Axeman terrorized the city, but the attack stopped suddenly without any explanation. And why is that? Was he killed? Was he jailed?
Did he leave the area?
Yeah. Did he move on because he thought, okay, maybe there's too much heat, I'm going to get caught? Did he go on to kill in other places? But like I said, the mystery of the Axeman continues to fascinate people today. I think mainly because there are just so many questions that remain in this case.
Yeah, definitely intriguing.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff to speculate on, for people to talk about in forums and go back and forth and things like that. Those are the kind of cases that really kind of live on, because there isn't much that is answered.
Right.
Really, if you think about this case. But that's it for our episode on the Axeman of New Orleans. We got some voicemails, Gibbs. You want to check those out?
Let's hear them.
Hi, Mike and Gibby. This is Alana from Oregon. I just finally caught up to all of the episodes. I love your guys' podcast. Your guys' banter is so funny. I crack myself. You guys crack me up all the time. I'll be at work. I work by myself just about all day. So I get to enjoy your guys' podcast, listen to you guys banter. I gotta say, there are days where I'm Team Gibby 100%. And then I gotta say, there's days where I'm Team Fergie 100%. So I guess I should say I'm just Team T-Cat. Well, I love you guys. Keep up your good work and keep your own time ticking. Hi, Mike and Gibby. It's Alana again. I'm so sorry. I forgot to let you guys know that I will be starting True Crime All the Time Unsolved, and I hope that one is just as good as T-Cat original. So, again, keep your own time ticking. Bye.
Wow. Thanks, Alana.
Yeah.
You notice she's really Team Gibby because she mentioned it first.
I can see why a lot of people would kind of go back and forth. You'll say something that's very smart.
Yeah.
And that would resonate with people. And then, of course. And then maybe I might say something that would resonate with people or make it sound like they're more like me. And then there's some things that you do or say that they say, oh, I'm more like Gibby. I could see that.
I think that's unlikely. Probably all just Team Gibby.
They really are.
Yeah.
And I'm fine with that.
No, you're not.
But it's interesting. We get a lot of people who leave a voicemail.
We do.
And then leave another one with just a little bit left. So I just put it in together. And this will be a little bit of an Easter egg because she's saying she's starting on Unsolved. So it may take a while, but eventually she will hear this and she'll be like, oh, yeah, I remember when I left that.
And then she'll wonder what we all wonder at the very end. What was that noise?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Jennifer. I'm calling. I've been listening to the show now for probably about a month. I've been listening to the Unsolved. I haven't hit the true crimes yet. However, I'm calling to tell you, one, the show is awesome. Two, I just got finished listening to the Tylenol murders. And one theory is, in my mind, is that it could have been one of those family members who wanted to cover up their crime. Therefore, they could have, dosed a whole bunch of bottles and then went and snuck them back on the shelf. Anyway, thank you guys. You do great. Keep your own time ticking.
Yeah, thank you so much for calling in. The Tylenol murder is a very interesting case. It is one that we've done a long time ago, so I don't remember everything we said about it, but that does seem like a possibility for sure.
Yeah.
If we didn't talk about it, then we should have. And I think it's your fault if we didn't.
Probably is. Most things are.
Those things are. I blame you for everything.
That's right.
But we appreciate the voicemail.
We do.
All right, buddy. That is it for another episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved. So for Mike
and Gibby,
stay safe and keep your own time ticking.
Hold on to your jingle bells. Pluto TV has all your holiday favorites for free. Enjoy our season's greetings category with 9 holiday channels, including holiday movie favorites by Lifetime, Festive Fireplace, Holiday Lights, and Hallmark movies and more. Download the Pluto TV app on all your favorite devices and start streaming holiday favorites on live channels and on demand. With thousands of free movies and TV shows, Pluto TV is your home for the holidays. Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.